Hey guys, how's it going? Since Path of Exile 2's delay, I wasn't really expecting much out of Grinding Gear Games. But this week, we've had gameplay walkthrough of Shuhei Yoshida, one of the executives in Sony's entertainment branch, and an interesting PC Gamer article that honestly raises more questions than it answers, but does hint at fast changes coming to Path of Exile 2, and no, not the ones you've heard about before. This is entirely new information. Alongside this, we've also had two short clips of new mercenary skills drop, which I'll cover in this video because they just look so clean, I need to talk about them. We'll start with those abilities, jump into the breakdown on the gameplay walkthrough, and then right into the PC Gamer article. Chapter markers below if you'd rather jump forward. Grinding Gear Games uploaded these two quick clips to their YouTube channel over the past week or so. The mercenary using the Voltaic grenade and Plasma Blast in one video, and then the cluster grenade in another. No word on what supports were used alongside these skills or any specific detail on builds, but the cluster sure looks like it has multiple projectiles supporting it. But first up, the Voltaic and Plasma. I'm going to let this one play because I want you to experience the sound design on this. God, it just sounds so good. I really like the overall design of this, but I'm very surprised to see an ability with that name, given it's fairly sci-fi, yet I'm kind of all for it. Quite interesting to see the grenades CCing what are almost certainly basic white mobs. The stun lasted a good 3 to 4 seconds before the Plasma Blast went off, which needed its own charge time. The stun almost feels a little too long to me. If it's supported by something that increases that time, I'm more okay with it. If that's just it at base, it might be a bit on the strong side. I don't see how those mobs really stood a chance there. Moving over to the other clip, the cluster grenade, which honestly kind of speaks for itself. It's a grenade that explodes into clusters, and it sounds a lot like a firecracker. What I found really interesting about these clips is how quickly the mobs died. In so much of the gameplay we've seen, characters are usually using 2, 3, sometimes 4 abilities to take out packs. In both of these clips though, it's 1 or 2 skills. The cluster bomb were wiping out entire mobs and basically the entire screen of enemies with a single click. I don't know about you guys, but I've really struggled to get a good grasp for the general time to kill on mobs in Path of Exile 2. I've thrown up some old mercenary gameplay for contrast, and it's quite a shift. This could be what we expect in the later game, but until we get hands on it collectively and we start seeing balance patches brought in, I don't think we'll get a great sense what Grinding Gear Games are aiming for. Regardless though, both of these clips have absolutely raised my hype to try out this class on release. Alright, moving over to the new gameplay and walkthrough with Shuhei Yoshida. This is on the Grinding Gear Games YouTube channel, which I'll link in the description as I've cut quite a bit out of this. We didn't really get new information here, some gameplay of skills and bosses that I personally hadn't seen before, but there's so much floating around, it might not be new to everybody. First up, Shuhei Yoshida's overall impressions of the game were largely positive, and could largely be summed up as better and more. He complimented the game's improved graphics, larger class roster, and how much easier it is to play on a controller as both he and Jonathan played together co-op style. A random side note here, I was actually surprised at how well Shuhei was playing the game, and after beating the tutorial boss, he did a true gamer move and started running in circles. I feel like only people who actively play games get that invested, and it really feels like he enjoys the hobby, rather than being another classic higher-up executive type. If you're not familiar with Shuhei Yoshida, he used to be the president of Sony's PlayStation division, and now holds a different executive role. What we saw from this gameplay walkthrough was some additional monk skills and how they synergize. This is the gameplay that was fairly new to me. We saw Palm Strike, which has been shown off before, that gives a power charge on kill. Some additional skills we saw shown off included a bell that sits on the staff until activated. This did require the player to land a number of hits to charge the skill, similar to the Vaal skills from Path of Exile 1, but much simpler to pull off. Once placed, the bell could then be hit while you're hitting enemies to add additional AoE damage. We also saw those power charges being used to buff the monk's weapon with some kind of magic or elemental effect that would cause it to shoot projectiles while melee striking, and another very similar wind-based version of the same kind of effect, again shooting projectiles while striking. I do like the synergies here. The monk keeps coming off to me as a character that's going to have an insanely high skill ceiling, and one that is going to be so satisfying to play if you can line up all these abilities together. We did get a quick glimpse of Jonathan attempting to bring the two projectile buffs together, the bell and the general monk strikes, into one combo which absolutely shredded everything. I really liked that while he was trying to show this off that he actively had to put effort into setting up the combination of skills. It wasn't a simple 1, 2, 3 button press. He actively had to get enemies low, finish them with certain skills, and then drop the bell while they were active to get what he wanted to achieve, which was pretty solid damage. We then got to see more of a boss battle against Viper Napuatsi, showing off a fairly interesting fight. I'd suggest checking out the full video to watch the battle itself. Jonathan was dodging a hell of a lot, and this boss seemed really fast in nature. A lot of poison skills, quick movements, and as the fight goes on, she empowers the soldiers around the arena to take quick strikes, which also moves them forward, shrinking the overall size of the arena as it goes on. This really showed off how dynamic these fights can be. I can't get over the fact that we're going to have 100 of these bosses on full release. In the latter section of the video, Jonathan and Chuhai play some couch co-op together. I'll run some of the footage while I talk through the PC Gamer info dump, as we didn't really get new information out of their co-op session. We did get the mention of checkpoints outside of boss rooms, so if you die, you don't have to do the slog to get back, which was highlighted as inspiration from Elden Ring and the Souls series. Not new information, but something I don't think I've previously mentioned. And one thing I did pick up from their gameplay, which I think is expected by most, but reviving an ally who's died in a boss fight looks very, very challenging, if not impossible in some situations. Taking damage will stop the reviving process, and I'm going to assume most bosses won't give you the breathing room to accomplish this. Not entirely impossible, and with the ability to hit stun meters on bosses, this could add some fun dynamics to it, but I like the idea of it being very, very hard to revive an ally in a boss fight. If it's too easy, then co-op would become the best way to progress on hard fights, and we don't really want that. We want it nicely balanced. And our final section of the video, PC Gamer came out with an article on Path of Exile 2 this week after the writer had some hands-on time with it alongside the devs. Now, a ton of this article is just fluff, or stuff we already know, so I'm breezing over some of it, but we did get some interesting parts to this. I'll flag now though, that some of what we got is explained very poorly and in very little detail. You will be left with questions that don't have answers, but let's speculate where we can and tell me what you think. So, the easy stuff. He's stating definitively in the article that we'll see 6 classes for early access, not the full 12, which we already knew for the most part, but we're still waiting on official confirmation. He was impressed by the differences in the mechanical experience between classes, essentially how different they felt from one another, and this is where things get weird. In the article, in this graphic showing 4 confirmed classes for early access, you'll notice it says the other 4. The first half of this article spoke about the Monk and Marauder, so that's the 6 expected for early access. The weird part is under the Warrior. It says, and I'll quote it, a traditional sword and board fighter over the Marauder's muscle wizard archetype. Now, I've never thought of the Marauder in Path of Exile 1 as a muscle wizard. If anyone in the Path of Exile community has that perception, you need to explain it to me in the comments. I previously guessed that we'd see the Marauder focus more on totems, maybe some minor elemental magics with a greater focus on fire, but I don't think this class is ever going to focus on being a muscle wizard. I have no idea what else to make of that, unless he just thought the words were funny together, so let's jump on. Throughout the article, the writer praises the game fairly heavily, particularly the boss fights, saying that the sheer amount and variety put Elden Ring to shame. Not sure I'd agree, but I can see what he's going for. He does mention in the article that like Path of Exile 1, many bosses go into an invulnerable state in Path of Exile 2 while they transition between phases. I've never been a fan of that, and it was one of his few criticisms. In Path of Exile 1, I think the fast pace highlights this issue. In Path of Exile 2, we might not feel as put off by it with a slower style, but either way, looks to be a returning feature. To this, he also made some comments on the speed of the game, with some direct input from the game directors. Specifically, they've suggested that a speedy character in Path of Exile 1 is likely to be swinging around 50 times per second. In contrast, for Path of Exile 2, a speedy character will be hitting about 5 times a second. Still quite fast, really, and a lot of that comes down to damage, right? If you could do the same damage in 5 swings instead of 50, I'd almost prefer the 5 to be more visually readable. They also commented that the game is balanced around DPS increases being multiplicative. Overall, I've seen a ton of back and forth on PoE's speed. Some people love it, some people hate it. Some love what Path of Exile 2 is doing, some don't. A lot of that is going to sit with your preference, but I'm personally loving the slower style. Alright, now all the following changes are poorly defined in this article, poorly worded for the Path of Exile vets out there, and what we have is what we have when it comes to details. First up, the writer references a section in Act 3 that will, and I quote, corrupt your items with vile magic to perhaps open up gem slots in them, letting you tweak their stats further with special blood crystals, end quote. Hell of a statement. My best guess on this is I think he's misused the term gem here. Gems in Path of Exile are generally skill or support gems. I'm hazarding a guess that this could be jewels, which are generally socketed into passive skill tree. Maybe we'll see the option to also socket one in chest pieces or belts, similar to some of the Abyss related items in Path of Exile 1. But this could also be its own new beast, or system, or something completely specific to Act 3. But without further details, it's all speculation. What do you think this statement means? Let me know in the comments. Maybe I'm missing something obvious here. Maybe it really does open up a new skill socket within your gear, but who knows? Next, we have some comments on player-to-player trading, and the suggestion we could see an in-hideout NPC who trades items between players at a gold tax. But from the wording, this sounds to be a thought or concept being explored by Grinding Gear Games, rather than one that is 100% in motion. We know Grinding Gear Games were experimenting with a player-to-player currency exchange in the Settlers League. I think it's reasonable to assume they've been looking for a solution to allow players to trade items in-game. I would like to see them streamline item trading, so I'm hoping they can make that idea work, but again, we'll have to wait and see. And the final change, which I mentioned at the start of this video, is that Grinding Gear Games are again looking to rework their flask system. Their new plan is to limit players to a single slot each for health and mana flasks, with them holding more capacity, as opposed to the 5 slots we're used to now. And with this would be a new trinket system that provide utility like automatically activating Ignite, Bleed, or Freeze cures, which were part of the initial plan for Path of Exile 2, to have in your utility flasks, to be specific to a condition rather than something you hit for X amount more armor. And I'm sorry to say, that's all we got for comments on this idea from this article. Grinding Gear Games are looking to bring your 5 flask slots down to 2, and bring in trinkets to take the place of the others with more automatic effects. I personally like it in concept. I think the move to WASD hitting 9 skills and 5 flasks, plus a dodge and movement, was probably going to feel like a lot for players using that type of movement. I'm not sure if the plan here is that the trinkets remove debuffs on flask use, so there's still that connection. I can't imagine they are purely set and forget trinkets, as the article suggests. I just can't see a world in which they are automatic. They must be tied to some kind of action, otherwise your burns and frost from enemies don't really mean that much. Sorry to leave you with those questions, guys. The article really did raise more than it answered, but let me know in the comments what you think about these. Do you like them? How do you think they'll be implemented? I'm genuinely curious how that will play out. Thanks for checking out this video. As always, if you want to help out the channel, you already know how. Throw a like on the video, sub if you want to see more, but you being here, that's what really matters. Thanks again, guys, and I'll see you down in the comments. Cheers.